The sky didn't just darken. It fractured. At 3:07 hours, above the black pine expanse of western Montana, a ripple split the night like torn fabric. Silent at first, then roaring like a god waking in anger. No warning. No satellite saw it coming. No radar. No chatter. Just silence, and then a burst of unnatural light that punched a hole through the stars. From the northern peaks to the lowland rivers, the forest stirred. Elk scattered. Owls blinked and fell silent. Even the wolves, apex predators of the wild, tucked tail and vanished into shadow. Something older than instinct warned them. Humans, however, humans were still sleeping. The object breached atmosphere at 34,000 miles per hour. Not a meteor, not a missile. It steered. It hunted. A crescent-shaped vessel made of obsidian metal, its edges rippling like oil under moonlight, cutting a wound through the clouds as it descended. Then, impact. The forest exploded. A crater the size of a football stadium cratered into the valley floor, turning pines into flaming spears and rock into smoke. The shockwave cracked trunks and buckled the ground. Birds fell mid-flight. Rivers changed course. And inside the crater, the ship hissed. It didn't cool like metal. It seethed. Its surface writhed like it was alive, pulsating with veins of green and crimson energy. Symbols, glyphs not meant for human eyes, flashed along its hull. Then the ramp unfolded, slowly, purposefully, as if savoring the unveiling of what was inside. They stepped out, 8 feet tall, exoskeletal monsters in obsidian armor, claws like machetes, eyes that saw beyond light. The Ravagers had arrived. They didn't come to communicate. No diplomatic beacons. No attempts at contact. Just scanners, weapons, and the scent of conquest in the cold morning air. These weren't explorers. They were exterminators. They spread through the woods like fire, harvesting, cataloging, killing. One cut down a 300-year-old cedar with a sweep of its arm. Another sniffed the air and clicked in some guttural language, as if disappointed by the lack of resistance. To them, earth was prey. Soft, primitive, a stone beneath a boot. And to prove it, they began collecting. Deer, elk, bays, gone, vaporized. A fire lookout tower, sliced clean in half. A pair of hikers 10 miles out, reduced to ash. No screams, no alarms, no news. The Ravagers moved with surgical indifference, until they reached the ridge, until they felt it, the sense that something was watching them, not from the sky, from the trees. Miles away, a single man stirred. Jack Kestrel didn't sleep like most people. He didn't dream. He didn't toss or turn. He lay still as stone, senses finely tuned by decades of war and wilderness. And when the sky split open, he opened his eyes before the quake hit his cabin. His hand went to the rifle on the wall, his body already moving. Within seconds, he was outside, bare feet crunching frost, gaze locked on the unnatural light bleeding into the horizon like an open wound. He didn't blink, didn't speak. He just watched. His cabin sat deep in the black pine expanse, 10 miles from the nearest dirt road, surrounded by endless forest. No phone, no internet, no neighbors, only trees, mountains, and silence. But this silence felt wrong. Too perfect. No birdsong, no wind. Even the wolves were gone. That's when Kestrel knew. Something unnatural had landed. He turned back inside. Fast. Efficient. Within 3 minutes, he'd packed a small rucksack, medkit, fire starter, a hand-forged hatchet, binoculars, MIEs, and extra magazines. Then he grabbed his rifle, a long-range bolt-action relic with custom ironwood grip, and a scope that could read newspaper at 700 yards. He paused at the door. Most men would have stayed behind, called the Rangers, waited for someone official to figure it out. But Jack Kestrel wasn't most men. He'd hunted ghosts in the Hindu Kush, tracked warlords through jungles where the sun never touched the soil. He didn't trust authorities. He was the authority, and something was about to learn that. The trek was brutal. Cold air knifed through his jacket as he moved through the underbrush like part of the terrain, silent, invisible, predatory. His boots made no sound. His breath was slow, even, measured. By 5:20 hours, he crested a ridgeline and spotted it. The crater. It looked like the earth had tried to give birth to hell. Black smoke rolled upward in thick columns, choking out the sky. The trees around it were flattened like grass beneath a stampede. And in the center, the ship, he raised a scope. One of the creatures was standing on a boulder, scanning the treetops. Its armor shimmered, liquid yet hard, chitinous but technological. And its face wasn't a face, just a glimmering void with four burning red eyes. It moved, with purpose, with intelligence. Kestrel exhaled and lowered the rifle. Whatever they weren't here by accident. They were tactical, efficient, prepared, which meant Earth was being assessed. Or worse, cold. Down below, the Ravagers were already spreading out in squads. They used floating drones, small, spider-like things that drifted silently through the forest, tagging life forms and transmitting data. One latched onto a hawk mid-flight, injecting it with some kind of green needle before dropping it like waste. Kestrel followed them, shadowed them. For hours, he watched, catalogued, measured, and then he saw the worst of it. They didn't just kill. They harvested. He spotted what remained of a logging crew, 4 men and a woman. Their bodies hung like meat from a scaffold of glowing tendrils, being dissected by hovering blades. Organs were pulled, catalogued, and sorted like components in a machine. And the creatures laughed. Not the human kind. The kind that reverberated in the skull and made your gut clench. Kestrel nearly charged then, nearly fired the shot that would have made him a corpse by dawn. But he waited, watched, studied. This wasn't a fight for glory. It wasn't revenge. This was war. And he'd waged enough of them to know. You don't strike until your blade can reach the throat. By nightfall, the Ravagers had mapped out a 15-mile perimeter. They moved with perfect coordination, communicating in bursts of ultrasonic pulses and clicking growls. One by one, Earth's apex predators, grizzlies, cougars, wolves, vanished. But so did one of them. The smallest Ravager, a scout unit, failed to report in. Its body wasn't found. Its signal was gone. And high above, on the ridge, a man sat motionless, watching them with cold, calculating eyes. His blade was clean. His rifle was still slung. But the ground where the Ravager scout had passed hours earlier was disturbed, just slightly. A scuff in the moss, a snapped twig, and a smear of black-green blood half-covered by pine needles. They hadn't noticed. Not yet, but soon they would. And when they came looking for their missing hunter, they'd find Jack Kestrel instead. Dawn broke like a bruised eye. Smoke from the impact site still curled into the pale sky, painting streaks of red and black across the clouds. Birds began to return, hesitantly, chirping broken songs. The wind had changed, no longer wild, but watchful. Jack Kestrel stood perfectly still beneath a thicket of frost-rimmed pines, 3 miles east of the crater. His boots were silent against the frozen earth. His breath ghosted out in slow, controlled puffs. A lifetime of war had trained his body to vanish into terrain, and out here, the forest was his terrain. The Ravagers had made a mistake. They left a gap, just a few meters between 2 overlapping patrol paths, barely noticeable unless you knew how to hunt. And Kestrel knew. He had tracked men before, guerrillas, warlords, mercenaries with twitchy fingers and bodies soaked in drugs. But this was different. The Ravagers weren't men. They didn't sweat. They didn't tire. They didn't bleed, not like humans. But they could die. One already had. He'd taken the first one silently. A scout, likely the youngest of the bunch. It had strayed just slightly too far from its pack, a textbook mistake. Kestrel had set a trigger snare along a game trail, one modified with barbed fishing line and a bent sapling under tension. The creature was fast enough to nearly escape, but nearly didn't count out here. When it fell, Kestrel moved like an executioner, fast, brutal, silent. One clean slash of the hatchet to the back of its neck joint. The creature convulsed, made a noise, not quite a scream, more like a data crash in a meat body. Its blood was thick and black-green, like antifreeze mixed with ash. He dragged the carcass beneath a boulder shelf and covered it with pine needles and moss. By the time the others started pinging its location, it was already too late. They had lost the signal. But Kestrel had gained information. He had studied the body for nearly an hour. Its armor wasn't natural. It was grown. A biomechanical carapace laced with neuroresponsive tissue. When he removed a piece from the wrist, it twitched in his hands. He sealed it in a tin and buried it a few yards away. Couldn't risk contamination. He'd seen what foreign tech could do to a man's bloodstream in Afghanistan. All was, to his mind. But what caught his attention most was a helmet. A seamless black shell with 4 recessed lenses, each blinking faintly with residual energy. It hissed when he pried it free. Underneath, no face. Just cartilage, mandibles, a grid of interlocking fangs, and what looked like sonar nodes. Not designed for speech. Designed for tracking. The creature wasn't a soldier. It was a predator. An elite one. And still, it hadn't seen him coming. That gave him one advantage. Fear. The Ravagers responded by tightening the net. Faster patrols. Drones in higher loops. Their ship pulsed brighter now, the glyphs on its hull reacting to the loss of one of their own. But Kestrel was already gone. He moved between shadows like mist, from gully to ridge, ravine to overhang. Setting traps. Observing. Listening. He counted 17 confirmed hostiles. At least 3 had plasma cannons built into their arms. One had no legs, only coiled metal tendrils that slithered over the ground, dragging its spiked abdomen behind like a scorpion. But their command hierarchy? That was murky. They didn't salute, didn't bark orders. They vibrated, subtle pulses through the air, like wireless echoes of authority. He marked the largest one, the only Ravager with twin shoulder fins and a skull trophy belt, as the likely alpha. He made a note. Kill that one last. Let him watch the others die first. Around 10:30 hours, Kestrel stumbled upon something strange. A tree. No, not a tree, a totem. One of the Ravagers had carved it into a cedar trunk, using what looked like plasma claws. The etchings glowed faintly, alien runes surrounding a spiral of skulls, mounted like twisted trophies. Deer, cougar, bear, human, 4 skulls, a progression, a hierarchy, and dead center at the top, an empty slot. Waiting. The meaning was obvious. They were ranking Earth's life forms, testing them, deciding where we fell on the ladder. And the top slot was unclaimed. A challenge, a warning, or a target. He backed away slowly, not out of fear, but calculation. He couldn't strike yet. Not loud, not openly, not until he learned how they moved when panicked, how they responded to chaos. Fear was predictable, and tonight he'd feed it to them by the gallon. At sunset, the woods ignited. Kestrel set the first trap an hour after dusk, a tripwire disguised beneath roots. When the Ravager patrol passed over it, the tension snapped a plasma grenade loose, one stolen from the dead scout, and launched it skyward. It didn't explode. It buzzed. A sonic frequency tore through the trees like a banshee, rupturing bird eardrums and causing for Ravagers to clutch their skulls and scream in their own mechanical tongue. One fell. The others regrouped. That's when the second trap hit. A falling log, sharpened, reinforced with scavenged steel spikes, swung down from 2 pines and impaled one Ravager clean through the chest. No armor could block it. The others retaliated, firing plasma bolts into the trees, but hit nothing. Kestrel was already moving again, sliding down a ravine and disappearing into the fog like a ghost in war paint. They howled, searched, scanned. They found only blood and fear. But the Ravagers weren't stupid. By midnight, they triangulated the traps, moved in coordinated loops, began torching sections of forest to flush him out. One by one, trees fell in fire and fury, and still no Kestrel, until a lone Ravager, separated from his squad, spotted a figure in the fog. Human silhouette, kneeling, weapon down. It charged, plasma blade ready, mandibles out. 20 feet. 10. 5. The fog lit up. Crack! A rifle shot tore through the Ravager's eye socket at 2,800 feet per second. It dropped mid-lunge, skidding in the date, leaving a 10-yard trench of broken bark and crushed roots. By the time its comrades reached it, its body was still twitching. Next to the corpse, a note, burned into bark with plasma. 1 down. Far above, in their orbiting relay ship, silent, cloaked, a signal lit up. A warning. A query. Something unexpected. Casualties logged. Unidentified hostile. Terrain compromised. Reevaluate engagement. And from the shadows of the forest, Jack Kestrel looked up. They were watching. Good. Let them. Let them look at Earth and see not a rock full of prey, but a crucible where even monsters burn. He vanished into the trees, rifle slung, hatchet dripping. The war had just begun. And Earth's first counterstrike had a heartbeat. To understand the Ravagers, you must first understand their pride. They had scorched 14 planets, burned jungles made of glass trees, hunted silicon beasts across oceans of methane. They had slaughtered war chieftains with minds like quantum computers. Never once had they encountered a world where resistance came from below, from the dirt, from flesh and blood. Earth was supposed to be a hunt, a cleansing, not a war. But now, one of them was dead. Then two, then three. And each death came not with glory, but shame. No battle cry, no honorable duel, just traps, shadows, and a bullet to the skull. Inside the command chamber of the Obsidian Craft, the Alpha Ravager, designation as Karun Threx, stood motionless. Its 4 eyes flickered with data from the uplink, life form counts, drone telemetry, heat maps, all of it useless. The invader, the color, as it was now labeled, had no digital trail, no pheromone signature. He moved like static between channels. He did not announce himself. He struck, he vanished, and he left messages behind. That was the worst of it. The taunts, symbols carved into bark, bones arranged like runes. Mockery, send more. I'm not done. Come find me. The younger Ravagers were rattled. You could see it in their movement, the jitter in their neural sheaths. They turned their heads too fast, fired at shadows. One even disobeyed a patrol directive, unheard of among their kind. They were elite, genetically perfected, bred from the marrow of galaxy conquerors. And yet, they feared the forest now. Back on the ground, Kestrel was evolving. The kills weren't just victories, they were data. Each dismembered corpse gave him new insight, weaknesses in armor joints, the time it took for their targeting systems to lock on, how fast they turned, which sounds made them flinch. He stopped thinking like a man, started thinking like prey that bites back. He reinforced the traps, added countermeasures, designed a sound mimicry device out of a cracked drone and a Bluetooth speaker salvaged from a dead hiker's pack. The speaker now hung in a tree, 30 feet up, on a timer. When it activated, it looped the sound of a Ravager's death cry. The patrol that heard it reacted as expected. They converged, weapons drawn, and walked directly into a minefield of pressure-triggered trip blasts, handmade, improvised, and packed with sharpened iron shards. 2 down. The third limped away, but not for long. By the third night, the forest felt like a haunted cathedral. Smoke veiled the moon. Bones dangled from branches. The animals had vanished again, not from the Ravagers, but from the violence they couldn't understand. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. And in this cathedral of blood and silence, Kestrel became myth. The Ravagers gave him a new title in their tongue, K. Vorin Talzer, the shadow that kills without sound. Their AI translator interpreted it more literally, death that hunts death. A title not given in respect, but in necessity. An enemy with a name is a problem, but one with a legend, that's an infection in the mind. Karun Threx made his decision. He would face the color personally, not out of honor, not rage, but logic, tactical doctrine. The longer this dragged on, the more the Ravagers lost control of the terrain. The planet was small, but its spirit, its defiance, was vast. They could not allow other fleets to witness this failure. A Ravager commander did not lose to a primitive. He selected his gear: dual plasma blades, neural shield dampener, motion haze cloak, and a grafted relic blade made from the spine of a fallen Zon beast. He would go alone. Jack Kestrel knew. He could feel it in the woods, a shift in the wind, in the vibration beneath his boots. Something larger moved through the dark. Not fast, not careless, measured, deliberate, a leader. Good. He wanted this one. At 3:12, they met. No tricks, no ambush. Kestrel stood in a clearing surrounded by split pines, blood-soaked stumps, and burned moss. His rifle slung, his breath fogged, his hatchet in hand. Across from him, Escaru and Frex emerged from the gloom. Taller, bulkier, eyes like coals in black ice. They stared. Neither moved. No words. Just a low, thrumming challenge in the air between them, one that transcended language. Then, without ceremony, war. Frex moved first, blur fast, plasma blades sweeping like comet trails. Kestrel dodged the first strike, barely. The second scorched his sleeve. He rolled, swung his hatchet upward, struck armor. Sparks. No give. Frex countered, landed a blow to Kestrel's ribs, cracked two, sent him flying into a fallen log. Kestrel coughed, spat blood, grinned. Finally, a real fight. He reached behind his belt, pulled a short blade, carbon steel, dipped in Ravager blood. He rushed. No retreat. Slashed left, jabbed high, faint, then dropped and drove a knife upward into Frex's abdomen seam. The alien howled. Armor hissed. Kestrel was already moving again, snatching his rifle, diving behind the trunk, reloading. Frex activated his cloak, shimmered, vanished. Kestrel closed his eyes. Listened. There. A hiss. 6 feet left. Plasma hum. Kestrel spun. Fired. Boom. A miss, but close enough to rupture the cloak. Frex reappeared, bleeding from 2 vents. Rage shimmered across his face like static. He roared and charged. They met in a whirlwind of blades and fists, cracking bone and steel. Frex landed a brutal knee to Kestrel's chest, ribs shattered. Kestrel drove his hatchet into the Ravager's shoulder. They fell together, grappling in the date. Man-monster. It ended at the edge of a cliff. Kestrel tackled Frex backward, both tumbling over the drop, smashing through branches. They hit the river below like missiles. Underwater, blades flashed. Frex tried to drown him. Kestrel bit the Ravager's neck. They surfaced, choking, clawing. And then, silence. Only the rush of the river. Moments later, one figure emerged, dragging the other's limp corpse behind. Kestrel, barely breathing, one eye swollen shut. Hatchet gone, but alive, and victorious. He slung the Ravager's severed head over his shoulder. No words, just a look upward. He knew they were watching. In orbit, the Ravager fleet watched the signal die. The Alpha was gone. The last beacon, static, and then a new signal. Audio only, grainy, distorted, but clear enough to understand. Kestrel's voice. Send more. I'm not done. The transmission was not a bluff. When the Ravager fleet received Kestrel's voice, raspy, human, defiant, they didn't question its source. They questioned their failure. A single scout, a primitive, had not only resisted capture, he had hunted them. Worse, he had killed Frex, a warlord blood, a battle chosen. And now, he invited more. They obliged. 3 drop pods howled through Earth's sky like meteors on fire, streaking red across the stars and landing with impact craters that shook the nearby lake. Trees snapped like twigs. Shockwaves rippled through the mountain air. The earth trembled. Inside those pods, death. Elite Ravager shock units, not scouts, not trackers, but berserkers, designed not for search and destroy, but for eradication. Their arrival meant one thing. The hunt was over. Now came the purge. Kestrel was ready. He'd been ready for days, maybe years, since the moment the war had ended and he couldn't put the weapons down, since the VA gave him pills instead of a purpose, since the world forgot what men like him were for. But the forest never forgot. It taught. It whispered. It bled with him. Now it rose with him. He was no longer just surviving. He was waging a campaign. From the wreckage of Frex's corpse, Kestrel had scavenged everything worth keeping: armor segments, a plasma wrist gun, jury-rig and clumsy, but usable, and a communications node. The node had been encrypted, but after a night of trial, shock wire, and a car battery pulled from an old Ranger Jeep, he unlocked it. What he found was more than he'd hoped for: maps, coordinates, signal data, and most importantly, language protocols. The Ravagers thought in frequency, in pulse rhythms, in patterns of heat and pressure that formed meaning. Kestrel began to mimic those patterns, slowly, with clicks, with fire, with vibration traps. He couldn't speak their language, but he could speak through action. And message one was simple: you're not in control. The new units moved differently, smarter, faster, heavier armor, but their confidence was their weakness. On the second night, Kestrel led one into a shallow gorge choked with mist. The Ravager charged, heat sensors blazing. Mid-sprint, a thermite spike detonated beneath its foot, a trick stolen from a Ravager landmine and rebuilt using magnesium flares and pressure valve from an old hunting rifle. The Ravager's leg vanished. It fell, screeching, and that's when Kestrel struck from above, diving like a Hulk, knife first. He didn't kill it. Not yet. He bled it, and left it alive, tied to a tree with its own neurocords, upside down, heart still pulsing. When the others found it, carved above its head, burned into bark. I decide who dies last. The Ravagers retaliated with flame. They began clearing the forest. Not scouting, not tracking, but scorching. They poured fuel across 5 miles of growth and set it ablaze with blue plasma fire. Trees screamed in sap and smoke. Animals fled. Sky turned orange. Black snow fell from above. Kestrel watched from across the ridge, silent, eyes cold. He didn't cry, didn't rage. He mocked it and adapted. Within a day, he had relocated to the swamp basin, a sunken mire choked with roots, water, and shadows. There, fire was useless. Heat signatures were masked. Visibility reduced. This was his now. He fortified it like a fortress. Trip-line traps, sinkholes, stake pits covered in algae, low oxygen zones that gassed any Ravager who tried to charge. When one berserker tried to hover in with a jetpack, Kestrel fired a scavenge pulse round into the air intake and sent it spiraling into the muck. The Ravager clawed its way out and found its limbs stuck in mud thick as tar. That's when Kestrel struck with a sledgehammer, one forged from a boulder and 2 rolls of barbed fence wire. He hit the Ravager once, twice. On the third blow, its skull shattered like glass under pressure. Blood sprayed and arcs across moss. The swamp took the body. Kestrel had stopped counting kills. Not because he'd lost track, but because it didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about revenge. It was about message. And the message had become clear. You thought you were hunters, but this world bites back. In orbit, the Ravager command ship fell into chaos. Signals jammed. Units vanished. Reports became fragmented. One by one, their warriors were being drawn into terrain they couldn't navigate, stalked by a life form that refused to follow rules. One signal, transmitted from the surface, shook the commanders to the core. Audio. Again. Kestrel's voice. But this time distorted, deepened, mixed with their own frequencies. It said, "I've learned your patterns. You haven't learned mine. Keep coming." For the first time in Ravager campaign history, a fleet voted to withdraw planetary claim. They didn't speak of it as retreat. They called it containment, a sealed world, a cursed biome, a forbidden hunt. But they left 2 behind. 2 commanders, not to kill Kestrel, but to bury him. It happened in the dead of night. No glow, no roar, no sound. The 2 elite units dropped in silence, using graveglide and thermal ghosting. Kestrel didn't hear them, didn't see them, until they had him. The first hit knocked out his ear. The second dislocated his shoulder. The third dropped him to one knee. He fought like a cornered bear, eyes blooded, lungs cracked, knives in both hands. But they were relentless, like machines in rage. They didn't want him dead. They wanted him broken. And as they brought him to the edge of the cliff where it all began, they began constructing a pyre, made of Ravager bones, human remains, and burning sap, a trophy fire, to end the myth, to silence the scout. Kestrel didn't scream, even when they tied him down, even when the first flame licked his feet. He looked at them, grinning, and whispered, "Wrong forest." The fire exploded, not up, but out. It wasn't sap. It was pressurized fuel, soaked into roots he'd arranged a week earlier. The entire hillside detonated in a roar of shrapnel and flame, tossing all 3 bodies, Kestrel and the two commanders, into the gorge below. And when the dust cleared, only one climbed out, half dead, barely breathing, but alive. Kestrel. He limped through the ash, dragging one broken Ravager blade behind him, eyes on fire, mouth bloody. The forest behind him burned. But ahead, it whispered. He followed. They didn't believe the stories. Not at first. The transmissions were corrupted. Ravager tech didn't translate perfectly, just fragments of voice logs, heat maps, garbled death recordings, and one image burned into military satellites. A figure, human silhouette, standing alone on a cliff surrounded by smoldering alien wreckage, holding a blade made of something that had never been on Earth. Behind him, fire. Above him, silence. Around him, bodies. Alien, twisted, charred. And this was the moment the world's government started to care. They sent in the first Recon Team, Black Glass, a 6-man elite squad from NATO's secretive anti-extraterritorial division. Their objective wasn't combat. It was recovery. Recovery of the man, if alive. Or his body, if not. Also recovery of alien tech any Ravager cores. And, above all, containment. But only 4 of them came back. And none of them spoke again. The mission debrief was a disaster. No footage survived. No body cam feeds. Just blooded arm and men with blank eyes. One of them, Sergeant Monroe, had clawed the skin off his own arms during the chopper ride out. He said only one thing before they sedated him. We weren't hunting him. He let us find him. And he was waiting. A second team was prepped. Heavier. Smarter. Less questions. Operation Gravefall. They brought drones, seismic probes, air support. This time, they found something. A clearing. Not natural. Not recent. A perimeter of sharpened Ravager bones, 50 meters wide. Inside it, a scorched circle of earth, etched with foreign symbols and human code. At the center stood a single totem. A helmet. Ravager origin. Split in half. Planted upright like a flag. And beneath it, a footlocker. U.S. military issue. Inside, a journal. Written in blood, charcoal, and sap. The writing was insane. It wasn't linear. But the intent was clear. The man who had once been Jack Kestrel was no longer only Jack Kestrel. Each entry became more fragmented, less like a man recalling events and more like an animal mapping territory. Sometimes the words weren't words at all. They were sounds, mimic Ravager clicks and hisses. But here's what they pieced together. He knew the Ravagers weren't done. The commanders he killed were not the last. They were the scouts of a second wave. A warning, buried in one of their memory cores, showed plans for total planetary culling. Earth was still marked as unclaimed, but they feared the forest, feared him. So they left Earth to rot, to burn itself out, to contain what they'd awoken. The truth was worse than invasion. The Ravagers had quarantined the planet, left behind a digital plague warning in their own galactic language. World compromised. Hostile native lifeform incompatible with Harvest Protocol. Do not engage. Do not return. So Jack stayed, not to be found, but to be left alone, to become the myth the Ravagers whispered about in deep void channels. He went deeper into the wild, built no home, left no trail. He lived in the canopy, in the mud, in the bones of machines he dismantled with his bare hands. He hunted with steel, shadow, and silence. And when men came looking, he warned them, not with voice, but with signs, burned trees, totem markers, skinned drones hanging like game. Eventually, the government stopped sending teams. Too many didn't return, or returned wrong. One drone, recovered on the edge of Montana's restricted forest zone, recorded 34 seconds of footage before the signal died. It showed a blur of movement. A humanoid figure sprinting at impossible speed, dragging a Ravager blade behind him, covered in mud, teeth bared. Eyes shining, not in reflection, in rage. After that, they sealed the region, reclassified it as a biohazard zone. Not public, not even to the military. Satellites were redirected. Maps changed. It became known as a dead forest. And whispers filled the dark corners of intelligence networks. Of a man who had become more than man. Of a myth with teeth. But deep in the woods, Jack Kestrel didn't care about myths. He didn't sleep. He listened. He didn't remember his mother's face or the name of the war he'd fought in, but he remembered the way Ravager blades sang when they cut bone. He remembered the way trees warned him before drones arrived. He remembered what it felt like to be useful. And he knew someday someone would return. Aliens. Humans. Something worse. Didn't matter. He'd be ready. One winter, the sky lit up again. Not Ravagers. Worse. A black star descended. Angular, silent, cruel. Not Ravager tech. Something older. The forest groaned. Birds vanished. Wind stopped. And in the black frost, a figure stepped from the ship. Tall, silent, cloaked in shadow that bent light around it. Not Ravager. Not human. It walked 10 steps into the woods. And then it stopped. It saw the totems. It saw the helmet. And then it saw him. Jack Kestrel stepped from behind a tree. Hair long. Beard wild. Eyes not human anymore. Clad in armor built from a dozen species. Stitched with wire and rage. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't need to. The being paused. Studied him. The forest held its breath. And then the being turned. And left. No war. No invasion. No fight. Because some things are not worth the cost. Some places you just don't go. They say Earth was saved. Not by armies. Not by scientists. Not by politicians. But by one man with a knife in a war that never ended. They say if you wander too far into the wrong woods, and the wind dies, and the trees go still, you might hear it. The whisper, the growl, the legend of the forest scout. The one who taught the stars what fear tastes like. The one who never stopped hunting. Even after the war ended,